Diversity and inclusion in your organization. Are you setting the right tone? Join us right here on the Leadership Voice. Welcome to the Leadership Voice. I'm your host, Jay Barbuto. Today, our show is dedicated to helping organizations create a climate and set of policies that is welcoming and attractive to our diverse workforce. Joining us today are three executives with great perspective on diversity and inclusion. Joining us will be Regina Johnson, formerly of Western Asset, CoreLogic, and Spirion. Also joining us is Vicki Shillington, partner at ThinkShift, formerly of Beachbody, Skechers, and Western Asset. Also joining us is Scharrell Jackson, COO and principal at BPM, and founder and CEO of the infamous Leadership in Heels speaker series. Welcome to the show, ladies. Let's start things off with a first question, which we'll have Scharrell answer, which is to please talk about diversity and inclusion. What is it, and why do companies need to pay attention to this issue now more than ever?
First of all, I want to say thanks, Jay, for allowing me to participate on the show this morning. I think that it is time that we start to really look within ourselves as leaders and start to understand who we are and how we lead. And I think that it is time that we start to ask ourselves whether or not everyone is truly included. As we have seen in our world that there is an uproar and the nation wants change. Everyone is not looking for someone to give them a hand out. People just want to have a fair opportunity. And I believe that as we start to evaluate our organizations and start to deal with the lack of diversity within our organizations, meaning that we don't have equal representation of all people, all types of people, all races, all genders, regardless of one's background, then as an organization, we are not really capitalizing on all that we can by having diverse minds within our organization. And I'll also say, as it relates to inclusion, it's not just about checking the box, but it's also about making sure that our environments invite everyone in the space where they actually belong. In other words, we're not asking them to change, but everybody is going to get comfortable being uncomfortable. So the nation is crying out for change. And I think that now is the time. Now is the time for us to address diversity and inclusion. And now is the time for us to start to creating change within our organizations, starting with ourselves.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Regina, would you like to offer your thoughts on this?
Absolutely, Jay, and thank you so much for having me on the show as well. And, I echo Scharrell's comments around, this is a real moment and a real opportunity to really think about what diversity and inclusion really means to us, not just from a corporate perspective, but I think as a broader global society. I think what you're seeing is, as diversity and inclusion concepts within organizations have focused on policies, practices, education, and awareness, we've kind of left out some of the most critical components around inclusion, and that includes belonging, and that includes what Scharrell mentioned, which is equality. And how do we think about equality so that everybody has access to those same kinds of opportunities? And so when we think about why it's so important currently, I think what we're seeing is that certain strategies that have been in place over a period of time, while the intentions have been positive, unfortunately, we've fallen short, both as corporations and systemic societies in our infrastructure. And we need to kind of take a look in and see what are things that we can do to kind of change that and make sure they're having the intended effects that we really are looking for, within organizations.
Great. Thank you. Vicki?
Jay, it's great to be with you this morning and with Regina and Scharrell. Building on what they've said, for me, more than ever, this time is so unique and so different. The issues have been around forever. We all know that. But this is the time where I've had more conversations over the last few weeks with my CEO clients on, well, how do we even have this conversation? Before it was an HR, no, don't go there. We could get sued. Be really careful about what you say, what you don't say. So they have no training in how to think about this topic personally and what it really means and how to lean into the conversations. But the behaviors of third or fourth graders. There's just no experience. They've never dealt with this before in a very real way, other than more of the policy and the process and the letter. We're talking about the spirit now. And the other side of it is a greater understanding as humans what we're all going through. So the number of conversations I've had over the past few weeks, since this has become more important than ever, around one of a very good friend of mine. He advises CEOs of these large companies, the most intellectual and stimulating man I've ever met. And he lives in Silicon Valley. And when he's walking around with his 9-year-old daughter, he feels like his job is to make her feel safe. But when she's with him, he realizes, hey, she's there to make me feel safe. Because when a policeman comes by, he sees a dad with his daughter. He doesn't see a 200-pound black guy. And these are stories we really need to know, because until we know them and can humanize what's really going on, everything will be the letter, not the spirit of what's intended. And it needs to move beyond that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. So we'll have Regina answer this next question first. So what should companies do to make this happen? And what is the role of leadership?
So, Jay, I think given the moment that we're in, we're seeing in a lot of conversations that I've been having with other diversity and inclusion practitioners, other executives, they are asking themselves these very questions. Many are taking a look at, their existing policies and making sure that, are they living up to the standards of the policies that they put in place to create an inclusive workforce? Are they missing things? There are a lot of organizations that are starting to say, I don't have enough data to really understand the problem, as well as then making sure that they're speaking and engaging, with a broader cohort, not only amongst their teams, but within the communities. I think there's a broader understanding that, it is not just about kind of what the internal practices are as they think about their people and they think about their teams, but corporations obviously serve clients, they serve customers, they serve the community. So many of them are looking at not just their people, they're looking at what are their philanthropic efforts, what are their purchasing efforts, so that they're really being very thoughtful around, how are they having a positive impact with people on their teams. So those conversations are happening now. I think over a period of time, we're going to continue to see what I think is seismic change, kind of across corporations, within our governments, within policy, that are going to kind of shape, I think, a lot of what we should expect to see moving forward around true parity and true equality.
Thank you. Let's hear from Vicki. What should companies do to make this happen? And what is the role of leadership?
Well, what you tend to see in a lot of companies is they focus on a role in HR around running the agenda of diversity and inclusion. And the challenge when you go down that model is you tend to outsource what diversity and inclusion is to one person, but you don't necessarily give them the budget to be able to do that, or the power to fire someone when they're seeing behaviors that are inappropriate. So they have no teeth. And so that tends to be, one of the big things not to do is to figure out how do you create the magic in organizations without necessarily outsourcing it to one person. And it really is a leadership topic, a leadership agenda that should be part of all the strategic priorities. It should be on the board reports. It should be a real effort that the leadership team is focused in on, and not merely an HR role and agenda that HR is trying to drive without a budget or the power to make anything happen.
Perfect. Regina, Scharrell, maybe you can weigh in on this. What do companies need to do to make this happen, and what is the role that leaders play?
First, I want to say I think that what both Vicki and Regina said are absolutely fitting. And I think the first thing that leaders and companies need to do is we've got to look within ourselves. We've got to look around, exactly what Vicki said, our human capital within our organizations, our clients, those that we serve, those that we purchase from, as was mentioned. And to the extent that we recognize that our population base is not diverse, we've got to ask ourselves why. I think as leaders, we've got to dig deep first, and we've got to ask ourselves, what has prevented us from working in, creating, or serving a diverse community? And then we've got to ask ourselves, do we truly want to change? Not because it's the thing to do right now, but because it's the right thing to do. I think we have to get in touch with ourselves as leaders first, and we have to understand what we have or haven't done and truly be authentic with ourselves about what we want to do. And then we've got to learn the how. We've got to have those tough conversations with our leadership team. And in order to infuse change, everyone has got to recognize that we're going to have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And not only that, but we've got to have that conversation with our employee base as well. We need to understand the pulse of where we are and where we want to go. And then accept the fact that obviously we are not there because we have not known how to do it. So we've got to ask for help. There are individuals like I heard Vicki talk about her servicing CEOs. I heard Regina mention what she does consultative. I do the very same thing and working with other CEOs. At the end of the day, leaders are going to have to reach beyond their current structure, and they've got to seek the support that they need to learn how to truly implement a true, diverse, inclusive, and belonging community within their organization, within their employee base, within their client base, with their vendors. And so that means that they're going to have to seek out someone who can actually support them through the journey. And I think that we have to also make sure that leaders have measurable and actionable steps that they can take so that they can determine whether or not they are truly progressing toward the initiative that they set. So I just think that we have to first seek to understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, or we're not doing it. What is it that we want to accomplish in this space of diversity and inclusion? And how are we going to get there? And then let's get the support, as I mentioned, that we need to walk us through the journey of understanding what it's going to take to reach our end game and make sure that we have some measurable and tangible tips that we can see our progress as we move the needle forward.
Let's stay right here with you, Scharrell, for this next question. So as we have volatile times like the ones that we are in right now, how does this impact the importance of organizations' response with policies, with culture and strategies?
You know, Jay, that's a very good question, because as leaders, we've got to know that it is all eyes on us. And our employees, our clients, they're looking to us. They're looking to see how are we going to respond. I think, you know, there are a number of companies, and I'm so proud to be a member of the leadership team at BPM. My CEO and I, we are literally having town halls where our entire employee base can participate, and we can talk about this authentically around the impact that the lack of diversity and the social injustice has had on Black people. We can talk about the fact that we may not be as diverse as we would like to be. And then we need to give our employees a voice. We need to give them a space where they can actually share their needs, their opinions, their expectations of us as leaders. And then as leaders, we have a responsibility to respond. This is a volatile time. And while there is a lot going out in the streets, we also have an organization that we want to make sure that we can sustain, and how we strategize to do that in a thoughtful and meaningful way, not only to make sure that we consider caring for those that we have, but that we are accomplishing that which we say. I just think it's critical, Jay. So in this volatile time, we have a responsibility as leaders to respond, and then to be accountable for what we say we're going to do.
Oh, that's great. Vicki, how do these volatile times impact the importance of organizations' responses with policies, culture, and strategies?
Well, Jay, it's helpful in these times to use systems thinking as we think about this challenge. So right now, there's a lot of reaction going on. There's a lot of movement. There's a lot of energy. And that's not a bad thing. That's actually a very good thing. But in a reactionary moment, it's very hard to apply systems thinking, which is all about solving the systemic problems. So right now, all we can really do is wait till things die down a bit and deal with the immediacy of what's needed. So as Scharrell mentioned, the town halls, the uncomfortable conversations, leaning into them, the unconscious bias training, looking at recruitment and diversity numbers, those are good things to be doing right now. But they're not going to touch on the systemic problems that are going on beneath the surface. Because when we think about systems thinking, we need to think about the behaviors, the systems and patterns that are underneath it. And that takes time. And so if we are starting to build roadmaps for the long term and solving this right now, I think that's a mistake. We've got to let things die down, deal with the tactics that are required right now, and let things emerge over the coming months to build a roadmap that is truly sustainable, so that we don't end up in 5 years with more lawsuits and performance issues or other issues that we aren't able to resolve because we've gone too far one way or the other. And it's going to take hard work, and we need to dig deep. But this is a long-term problem. And the important thing is to not think of it as a one-night stand. You know, it's not, hey, have some conversations and we're over and done with. This has to be sustained in order to get to the point where we can start to look at the systems of what's creating it.
Great. Thank you. Regina?
Yeah, I would echo what Scharrell and Vicki have said. I think currently the biggest thing organizations really need to take a look at is providing a place of safety, but also providing transparency. So as people are learning and trying to understand what is at root, what are some of the things that are creating the challenges and the disparities that we're seeing, as Vicki said, those things take time. So as leaders are starting to understand what is the problem and how do we effectively solve for it, the key piece in all of this is that they're creating an environment where everybody has a safe space to be able to share their ideas, share their feedback, and share some of their thoughts and points of view. One of the things that I failed to mention before on why diversity and inclusion is so important, you know, the business case has been around for decades. Companies that essentially, you know, have inclusive, diverse workforces, are active and engaged with the communities and the clients in which they serve, they outperform their peers hands down. So if you think about what it means for innovation, what it means for optimal performance for businesses, as well as then how it lifts up communities, leading with those types of practices is a recipe for success. And I think what we're finding is that this is now a new normal in which, you know, leaders, corporations, governments, communities have to kind of look at those systems and practices effectively, be transparent, but also create an environment where people can share ideas. So you're co-creating, you're co-innovating to solve the problem.
Great. Thank you, Regina. So we have one more question that we've prepared, but we're also going to take questions from our audience here in just a little bit. This next question, we're going to have Vicki answer first. What advice would you have for companies as they think about their role in diversity and inclusion?
This is a great question to end on, Jay, for this part of the program. As Scharrell stated a couple times, you know, the main thing is if you're not uncomfortable, you're not doing it right. You know, you're surface level, you're dancing around your handbag, you're not really getting into the heart of it. You've got to be deeply uncomfortable leading into what's actually going on. And until you truly empathize and understand what's going on, nothing's really going to change. So that would be my first ask. You know, something many corporate executives in their 40s and 50s have never had to do. They haven't been trained on. It's been a topic they didn't need to really go near before. Like politics and other topics that you just don't talk about in the organization. That's not okay right now. You have to lean in and be willing to go there, even though you've had decades of staying away from this particular topic. And go there as a human. Don't go there as an executive with a title. Just go there as a human and get curious and learn about each other and start asking, what if? You know, what if this person is a dad? What if this person has gone to Harvard? What if this person, whatever it might be, the what ifs create curiosity. They allow you to start to get really into the other person. And once you understand that story and you can humanize, and it's not a generality, that's where you're like, hey, that's not okay. We need to do something. So I would start there and take this as it's not a one night stand. This is humans being humans with each other. And until everybody feels completely comfortable and at one with saying what they need to say, and you know that deeply across the organization, you're not done. So it's going to take years and years and years. And I'm so proud. I'm helping an organization. I was on a coffee chat this morning with them, where they are every 2 weeks talking about this topic. And a few weeks ago, it was the racial unrest and Black Lives Matter. This morning, it was Pride. And leaders are talking about stuff they don't talk about. And I'm like, oh, you know, this is so good. Lean in. And they're so uncomfortable and the organization's loving it. And it's, don't stop. It's powerful.
Great. Regina, what advice would you give?
Learn One of the core things that I think this provides a real opportunity is for leaders and organizations to really truly learn and understand. And I think with learning comes again the power to change. More importantly, though, the power to make effective, lasting change. And I think so much of what has essentially been missing is the absence of that learning and creating an environment where learning can be possible and trying these things, trying these ideas, trying different ways of working and operating from those traditional systems. If they do that, I think the ability to change and transform is really, truly possible.
That's great. Scharrell, what advice would you have for companies as they think about their role in diversity and inclusion?
I think what everyone said is absolutely fitting. Both Vicki, what she said about just getting comfortable, being uncomfortable. I am telling every CEO as I do CEO roundtables or participate in town halls that it is critical that we get comfortable being uncomfortable. It is critical that we dig deep and we ask ourselves, are we a non-racist or an anti-racist? And, I also want to say that to the point that was made earlier, this is a systemic issue that is going to take a long time. So we have to decide whether or not this movement for change is actually going to become a part of our ongoing strategy, and that it is going to be a lifetime commitment to our organizational structure, to our leadership style, and how we live our life. And I think the other thing that I would say that was so fitting that was said is that we have to understand why African Americans, specifically around Black Lives Matters or other people who have been discriminated against. We have the LGBTQIA community. We have had issues around women, and how we have, to the point Vicki made, dehumanized people to the point that we don't feel. I think that what we have to say to ourselves is, what is it going to take for us to feel? And I truly believe it starts with love. I mean, I want to say that sometimes we think we have to be in the other person's shoes in order to understand what they are going through. But if each of us saw a dog being slaughtered in the street, we would feel pain. And they're not humans, but there is love. And so what I would say is that we have got to start opening up our heart so that we can love one another. And as we love one another, we will seek to understand. And that's where the learning comes in that Regina spoke of. And then we've got to continue to have conversations, to get to know ourselves, to get to know others, so that we can create a diverse environment where we can learn, we can grow, and we can prosper, because we have a variety of voices and minds around us. And we can capitalize on that, both personally and professionally. But I want to say the time to start is now. And so what I would tell leaders is, don't wait, start now.
Now, that's a great way to wrap up the main part of our show. We do have some questions from our live audience. We have 3 questions. And so the first question we'll have Regina answer first. Rosie, do we have some questions from our live audience?
Yes, Jay, we do. Our first question comes from Shauna from Ontario, and she asks, what can individuals do if their higher ups are not speaking up and addressing the non-diversity in their companies?
Thank you for the question. And that is probably one of the biggest challenges that I see with employees, or that I hear from employees, in various parts of organizations that I've worked with in the past. And this talks about, again, the psychological safety and whether or not you feel safe. So what I think is, for companies that may be having those as gaps, as an individual, try to find somebody that you know and you trust that you can communicate with. If it's not your immediate supervisor, as an example, then is there another leader that you've been able to forge a relationship with, that you can have that conversation and share with them your points of view? Other companies that are more mature not only offer that, create that psychological safety, but they also offer confidential ways in which people can share information, whether that's through confidential surveys or a confidential hotline. I would also encourage, employees to leverage that if they don't feel that they can have that conversation with anybody in leadership. But 9 times out of 10, any organization I've ever supported, there's always, at least one leader that really somebody can reach out to and trust and have that conversation. And by doing that, you will feel better about sharing your points of view, elevating up a topic that you feel is really important to the overall health of the company, and then leveraging that. You can also engage with those who are in human resources as well, if you also don't find that there's a leader in place.
Great. Scharrell, do you have some thoughts around this question?
I thought Regina summed it up beautifully. I completely agree with what she said around the fact that sometimes people don't feel that they have a voice, but to her point, there is always someone, and I think that we have to reach to the individuals who represent that which we desire and ask for their support. And sometimes even when it's not within our organization, there are other people who have influence on our leaders, and we can sometimes go outside of our organization in order to ask someone to be that person who can bridge the gap between us and our leadership team. So the bottom line is, I think that what we have to do is we've got to use our voice regardless. And I think that sometimes we are afraid to stand alone, but I truly believe that it's better to stand for something and stand alone than stand for nothing and stand in a crowd. So even if you don't think that your leaders will hear you, use your voice anyway.
Right. Vicki?
Take a position where you're not only looking after yourself, but you're looking after those in your community. So taking the time to explain the impact on you and what it means to you, and the opportunity for them to understand that, and do it in a very kind and caring way. But usually when you think about it, it's usually through a lack of knowledge and awareness that somebody has a particular perspective, or you perceive them a certain way. So humanize them and be willing to be honest and share how you are feeling the world, what's going on with you, and the impact on you, and what you'd like to have happen differently, so that you can create a bigger sphere of awareness in those around you, that they can understand what's going on for you.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Vicki. So we have 2 more questions. This next question we'll have Scharrell answer first. Rosie, what's our second question?
Jeremy from Whittier asks, how can you ask about a company's diversity and inclusion during an interview?
I think Vicki just described it. I think you just have to be authentic. In this time where we are with this volatility, I think oftentimes we've been hiding behind a mask and depending on what side of the table that you're sitting on. And remember, when you are interviewing for a job, they're not only interviewing you, but you're interviewing them. And it's important that it is a good fit for you. And so the things that are important to you, be unafraid to ask, obviously in a respectful and a professional way. But it is appropriate to ask whether or not an organization is represented and it has diversity, and ask them, what does that look like? Because oftentimes what we find is how one person articulates and processes and believes an organization is diverse is very different to another. So just be direct and ask that question in a professional way, and you'll be surprised at what answers you'll get and how people will appreciate the authenticity that's coming from an applicant.
Vicki?
Yeah, Scharrell said it beautifully. The only other question that comes to mind for me is asking them, if I was leaving the organization in 5 years and I was thinking about the diversity and inclusion agenda, what would I be sharing with others about what's going on here? And see what they come up with. That might get them thinking a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And Regina?
So I'll get a little granular on this question since it tied to interviews. I think, companies usually share information around their strategies as it relates to diversity and inclusion. So I think if you want to ask questions around that topic within an interview, take a look at what is it that they are sharing out with the public? What is it that they're sharing out with their customers in the community? And then decide what is missing, right? What is it you're not seeing that you want to be able to know and you want to be able to understand about that organization that isn't what they're publicly sharing? And that then, I think, enables you to, one, get the answers that you're really seeking as it relates to diversity and inclusion. But two, ensures that you're very, very focused in on making sure it's about what you're looking for and understanding the needs culturally, as well as having the company be able to answer any
Regina, could I ask you to answer that question one more time?
Sure. So again, from a tactical perspective, I would recommend that most companies, provide information publicly around their diversity and inclusion efforts, strategies, and activities. I would make sure that you understood those things around a company, and then say what is missing, what is not there in the story that they're sharing publicly, and use that as an opportunity to be able to ask during an interview process things that are top of mind for you as it relates to diversity and inclusion.
Great. So we have one more question for our from our audience, and we're going to have Vicki answer this question first. Rosie, what's our final question from our live audience?
Our last question comes from Anthony from Fullerton. He asks, what kinds of experiences have you had in relating with people whose backgrounds are different than your own?
Thank you, Anthony from Fullerton. Yeah, this is fascinating. So I grew up as a white South African under apartheid and moved to Europe in my early 20s and now live in Los Angeles. And I've got all sorts of perspectives and views as I've got more and more curious about how the world really works. And for me, the last few weeks of the types of conversations that are happening where people are really bearing their souls, it's making me go deep and to understand what did I grow up with and how did it affect me as a young kid, and what are my views on the world in topics that I probably wouldn't have wanted to dive into because they were so deeply uncomfortable, being one of the minorities on the bad side, as it were. And so I've got so many examples that are just beautiful. And the one I shared earlier about people's experiences in the world, what is it like when you have fear about, whether your Black kid will come home in the evenings or whatever it might be, just understanding that as a human, as Scharrell talks about with a dog being slaughtered in the street, understanding that is just so eye-opening to me. It's allowing me to dig into, well, what do I feel and what are my beliefs and what did I grow up with and how's that shaped who I am for a topic that I probably didn't want to go near because I didn't think it was okay. And so we all have our stories. We all have our own diversity issues, being willing to know that it's okay for us to be ourselves and not take on all that guilt and try and figure out how we can influence the world and change it to be a better place systemically. That's a big deal.
Thank you. Regina?
So I also have a bit of a unique story. I'm multiracial and had opportunities as a child to live in other countries, both within the U.S. as well as outside. And I found, growing up, I had to learn, a variety of different cultures. And it really helped me to understand that listening was so key and important in creating a common language if there were differences. And also understanding that differences are okay, right? The uniqueness around every individual, every human being is a gift. And why we don't see that, is a loss as far as I'm concerned, because everybody brings their own special attributes, their own special talents to this world. And what an opportunity is that, if we think about companies or the world, to be able to leverage our best selves. And so, over the years and growing up in different environments, different cities, different towns, that's shaped me to help to kind of really understand the different perspectives and people's backgrounds and what it is that they're bringing to this world that we live in.
Scharrell?
Wow. Well, like the other ladies, my experiences are vast as an African-American growing up in South Central and moving to Orange County in early years and being an executive most of my career in South Orange County. I've always been different than my other cohorts. And I've had a lot of experiences that have caused me to really look within myself and deal with insecurities that I felt because I was in environments, in many situations, most where I didn't feel that I belonged. I recognize that in many of my experiences, I was indirectly being asked to change in order to make other people feel comfortable. And raising 3 Black sons as a single mom in South Orange County. I have had some horrific experiences with my children. And as a result of all of those things, what I have learned the most is that I need to use what I have as an opportunity to serve others and penetrate some positive change. And I needed to really look at the fact that in order for change to happen, I needed to be comfortable with who I am and not be the only one shifting, but to start having those authentic, uncomfortable conversations with others around why it is that I'm the only person who needs to make an adjustment in our relationship. And so I guess to sum it up, my experiences around diversity, discrimination, raising 3 Black sons who've been discriminated against, working in environments where I was different as a Black person, a female as well, has taught me that in order to make a difference, I have got to stand even when I'm standing by myself, as I said before. And I can't become bitter. I've got to be professional about it, as Regina so eloquently spoke. And I've learned and evolved as a leader, and I'm still learning. When I'm offended, I have learned to use that as an opportunity to educate. When I'm hurt, I've learned how to stop and take a step back until I'm prepared to communicate. And when I'm experiencing or I'm observing that which I don't feel will yield a high return for all parties involved, I've got to stand even when I'm standing alone. So it's been a different, sometimes sad, sometimes exciting journey, but I think we all have to take the position that we want to play a role in change and use what we've been through to create something new so that other people don't have to experience some of the things that we've been through, regardless of what side of the table that we're sitting on.
Thank you. That's a great way to end today's show. I want to thank Scharrell Jackson, Regina Johnson, and Vicki Shillington for coming on today's episode on diversity, inclusion, and sharing your wisdom with our audience.
Thanks, Jay.
It's been great.
Thank
I
you.
think that's all the time we have for today's show. Join us each episode of The Leadership Voice as we bring you relevant themes that can guide your thinking and behaviors. On behalf of the Center for Leadership at Mahalo College of Business and Economics at Cal State Fullerton, I'm Jay Barbuto, and we'll see you next time right here on The Leadership Voice.